it's interesting now that we're several weeks past, we're finally counting up the popular vote, right?
Yep.
So about 2.4, 2.6 million advantage for Clinton over Trump. And it's interesting, this is probably the most incredible election in that we've never had a time when someone has lost the popular vote by so much and won the presidency without going to the House of Representatives, right? We've had two times before. One was Rutherford B Hayes in 1876. That was the election that ended Reconstruction. And we had John Quincy Adams. That was a deficit of 10% in the popular vote. He was eventually elected. These were the anomalies, right? We have never had an election. The Gore against Bush wasn't nearly such a margin. What happened? Trump got the most efficient distribution of votes we've ever seen in an election, meaning he lost his margin in the red zone, the deep south, but he gained just enough to win the Rust Belt states. Meanwhile, Hillary piled up all these irrelevant, superfluous votes in New Jersey and California and New York, all these blue zone states where that didn't do any good. The Democrats did poorly down ticket, so they lost 3 more governors, further sealing in the GOP ascendancy in state legislatures and governorships, which is really amazing. It goes back to the early 1920s since we've seen such an incredible GOP strength in state governments. So this is really incredible. He won, think about it, he surmounted a 2% popular vote deficit. And the other 2%, this is about 4%, the polls thought that Hillary was at. The other 2% he got because the GOP came home and they voted, for the ticket. We had the shy Trump voter phenomenon, which was abundantly documented in robocalls versus live calls. And finally, you had great turnout from the Trump base. This was what we call non-college whites. But states with the largest share of non-college whites outperformed the pollsters most in 2016. So that's that. What are the demographic things that sprang out of this election? I think of interest. The gender gap continued to rise slightly. This is the highest gender gap we've ever seen in an election.
Well,
Trump is clearly the man's candidate. So when Michael Barone, he often, the great guy who writes the Political Almanac and so many great books. So Michael Barone talks about, soft versus hard America, mommy versus daddy America. Well, we have a bigger split than ever right now on that. There was actually a somewhat diminution or somewhat narrowing of the split by race. And also by age. Millennials actually got a somewhat higher share of millennials voted for GOP this election than in 2012. And also, interestingly, amazingly, considering what the commentary was on the election, somewhat higher share of African American and Hispanics voted for Trump than for Mitt Romney, right? So amazing. A lot of that had to do with Clinton rather than Obama, I'm sure, okay? There was probably the two most interesting aspects of the election was there was a huge decline in the income gap, meaning households under $50,000. Romney, it was about a 12 percentage point gap, meaning, voting for Democrat versus for Romney. Trump reduced that to about 6 or 7 percentage points, so basically half that. And also Trump did not get as much of a positive margin over $100,000, which means that this is part of the realignment, right? Trump is taking the GOP and radically shifting it to a lower income, lower socioeconomic, as we would say, base, and a base which is this is the last trend I'm going to point out, which is increasingly rural. The rural share of the GOP voter edge continues to climb. And it was about 53% for McCain versus Obama. It was about 60%, meaning all the rural counties voting, 60% for Romney versus Obama, 67%. And that's why you see increasingly this polarization by region. It's the coastal states, the urban areas, which are increasingly. We know that cities are getting younger, they're getting more educated. You got millennials coming back into the cities. They're safer, lower crime now. They're coming back into the cities, and so they're increasingly becoming blue zone. The rest of the country is increasingly becoming red zone, and that increases the hypothetical possibility of secession movements. We see that in Europe at various levels. We could see it here, although I would say that I think the serious possibility of secession would have been greater had Hillary won, given who the red zone is.
Do you think,
I don't think anyone's taking Cal exit seriously.
Yeah, but the whole you've written about this. I mean, you're serious about these secession realities because they're historical realities. Like, do you think that that's a credible threat, or do you think Trump needs to appeal to all these people that voted for him so that they don't have some kind of existential threat like that?
You would have, as I said, I think the the serious possibility of secession would have been greater. You can imagine Texas, Idaho, or something like that, if Hillary had won.
Okay.
These are all the preppers. These are survivors. We actually did a piece on them not long ago.
The
These are people already
Yeah.
storing up their ammo and stuff. So this is, and they're serious about this, and they could go that direction. Again, I just don't take the blue zone seriously. They're too much part of the system. The point is, in the United States, to do secession, you got to go away. There is no legal way to do secession in this country. We settled that in 1865. That question was settled. It's also been, there's a Supreme Court ruling on it. You have to actually get a constitutional amendment. And that, of course, requires the states, the majority of the states going, well, the majority of the states are now GOP, so that, they're just not going to go that route.
Now, how about the more tangible risks that I'd say is tangible? Basically, you get a kind of a Rust Belt whitey sweep, and then in what we would define as industrial recession states. A lot of people don't classify it that way. I think that that's accurate. I wonder if you do too. Didn't people that were already in a recession vote for Trump? And what happens if he doesn't get them out of it?
They will go for another candidate like him. I mean, what option do they have? I mean, they're going to be looking around. I think the real question is, will we switch back to the GOP party, right? We have a real split now in the GOP party. And by the way, this is a huge impact. And I would just say the big market implications of this are huge, because the market's expecting this huge supercharged fiscal stimulus, right?
Massive.
But the traditional party has not signed on at all. I mean, I haven't seen any of the traditional GOP leaders. They're talking about budget neutral, tax cuts. That isn't what the market's expecting. The market's expecting we're moving toward big supercharged fiscal stimulus, right? So I think that this is an unresolved problem right now that hasn't been clarified. But it's also points to the whole problem of the future of the party. Is it going to be Trump's party? Or is it going to go back to the high and dry kind of, neoliberal, kind of globalist party of the traditional GOP leadership, right?
Now, how do you think about the kind of the grandstanding, if you will, or the confidence interval of Trump into his coronation on the 20th? And what do you think that the risks look like, if you see any associated with that?
Risk meaning what? Geopolitical risks or political
anything.
risks?
I mean, literally, it could be anything at this point. I don't know. I mean, I'm perfectly happy embracing the uncertainty of it all at this point. I mean, there's so many different moving parts from, you could say that there's Bannon over here, there's Tillerson over there, the head of the Labor Department is now anti-minimum wage. I mean, there's so many different components to this that I think one would have to have a serious amount of hubris or arrogance to say that they know how it's all going to play out. But I'm more concerned about the king in his tower, kiss the ring, I am going to fix everything. The expectation that's being built into this rising presidency.
I think that it will be the economic situation on the ground that will determine which way Trump moves, and the political situation, and the fact that there's so much contradiction and so many paradoxes, right, in his administration. allows him the freedom to move any way he wants. Remember, it was very similar to, in a weird way, to Franklin Delano Roosevelt when he brought in the brain trust. He had all kinds of people. You know, he ran on not increasing the deficit at all. He ran on a very Victorian platform of sound finance and so on. But he had enough mavericks that he could move any way he wanted, right? And he played the moment. He kind of just went by feel. I think we're going to have a guy like that. He'll have a lot of competing opinions, a lot of competing advisors, and he's going to choose whatever he feels the moment requires. It's not going to be pretty, and it's not going to be predictable, but I do think events will push him in a certain direction. And I think that a lot depends on how the economy does, obviously how the markets do, and so on.
Well, what's interesting so far is that he's bid on that point, the market. He's actually talking about the stock market. Look at it. Look at how huge it is. This is all because of me. It's because of us. And the data, as you well know, because we write about it every day, has actually been accelerating. This is a very short-term window, though, Neil, where he's got both going on at the same time. U.S. growth's accelerating on a one-month basis. 1 month does not a trend make. But again, it's accelerating. Stock market's up. Is that his liability, or is that something that he looks at as what makes him whole?
I think that Trump would glory in a bear market.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely. Because it's early in his term. And remember what he said in the debates against Hillary. We're in a big, fat, ugly bubble. Do you remember he said that? And once the Fed starts pushing up interest, I mean, he said that. He had this whole scenario. Now, that was before his post-election increase. And now he doesn't want to badmouth that, right? It's all about him. So he can't badmouth it. But I guarantee you he could turn on a dime and said, see, I told you, right?
Okay. So it'll all be about because he's the master of look at over here, not over there. It's just a one game.
Totally.
You know, so you think that he'll pivot quickly and say, look, we have a lot of issues. These aren't my issues. You know that. This is Obama's problem.
Totally. And he's going to say, as I said in the debates, as I repeatedly said before I was elected, we have a rotten system. It's Wall Street, Obama, Clinton, they rigged it all. And I told you it was going down. And it's going down. Remember the famous quote from remember GW, this sucker's going down.
But it's hard to remember. It's actually going to be easy to remember it all because, of course, you have 50 or 60% of the country is royally pissed off about all this, that'll be looking for that. And their game of gotcha is not working currently. But he did appoint 2 Goldman guys to his team. It's not like he doesn't have Wall Street on his side. It's not like he's not talking about the stock market being all about him. He does have a cheerleading aspect to this.
He does, but remember, he needs the Wall Street guys because they, as he would always say, you need a guy in the system to know how to fix the system. You know, you need a guy who swims in the swamp to know how to drain the swamp.